all of you here, all who work for family and life. It's amazing to me to finally be here in Korea, in a land I've heard of and cared about since I was 10 years old. My first knowledge of and intense interest in Korea was in 1951, when the war here required that my brother of 21 be called to be a young officer in the United States Army to help stave off the advances of communism. His experience here, his decoration for heroism and his dangerous wounds were for me one of the first examples, intensely lived, of the importance of total self-gift for a cause. My fear for his life, my prayers and sacrifices for him, and my gratitude when he returned alive, most certainly gave my young mind the concept of the reality of giving all for something more important than oneself. It is, I must say, wonderful to see this thriving country and its growing church free from the misery which is sadly lived north of the 38th parallel. Now I'll do a little history. Example is, as we know, a key to human behavior. An example lived lovingly is very powerful. I was so fortunate as to be born into a very loving family and lived surrounded by loving examples. My parents were ordinary and were early defenders of life and Christian morality. My father was French and fought in the Great War of 1914-1918. The war which was to end all wars, they were told. After his experiences at Verdun and at other dreadful battlefields, he was shocked and amazed to find that peace brought a new mentality, the mentality of population control. After an entire generation of young men had died, how was it possible that the intelligentsia should be preaching the two-child family? This illogical and very negative proposal spurred him to deep demographical study, and his calculations quite precisely predicted the situation in which the West now finds itself, incapable of continuing to support its aging population. All through the 1920s and 1930s, my father, an anthropologist, lectured on this subject and was a member of the Alliance Nationale pour la Vitalité Française, which still exists. It's a very good demographic study institute. During these years of the 1920s and 1930s, as a young married couple, my English mother, a devout and prayerful Christian of the Anglican tradition, was an early crusader against this contraceptive mentality. She was part of the resistance in her church, the Anglican Church, against the approval for exceptional cases of contraception. She knew that, in the words of her bishop, if the church accepts contraception, the church will be destroyed. Alas, the Anglican Church did accept contraception, then divorce, then abortion, and now homosexual unions. Through the very difficult years of the Great Depression and the Second World War, these two faithful and loving people continued to have children and show them great generosity and love. And I was number 6 of that family, born shortly after the invasion of my father's country by Hitler's army. We lived certain privations and certainly no luxury, but we were an extremely loving family and always felt sorry for the children around us who were in families where the parents firmly said, no, 2 is enough. My parents were pro-family before that word was coined, and pro-children, pro-life in thought, word, and deed. And so it was normal that I should have taken up that banner when I saw it attacked. When I was 21, I married a most wonderful man from Venezuela in South America. I moved there and I loved it. particularly the culture of large families which I found there, contrasting with the attitudes of the 1960s in the West, which were turning against children and towards abortion. The Lord granted us the grace of children, and we enjoyed teaching them all we could in order to prepare them to be apostles in the modern world. The Lord also privileged us with something we never expected and certainly would not have desired. After 6 healthy, intelligent children, He allowed our 7th to be born very severely brain damaged. Our Leopoldo was born blind, deaf, and without sensation. His brain was not capable of knowing if he was held or not. He could not suck nor make a fist. After the first frustrating year, when Leopoldo's condition got worse, and he did not grow at all, we were able to find a therapy group in the USA which believes in giving every child a chance. They gave us an intense program of stimulation of all the senses, which in those days of the 1970s was considered crazy, but which has been proven to be the correct approach to neurological development. Our program was 9 hours a day, every day, and the results were amazing. Leopoldo began to hear and then have a pupil reflex, resulting 2 years later in vision. He began to grow and to know where he was and to interact lovingly with his brothers and sisters. Leopoldo only lived to be 14 because the seizures and his severe problems exhausted his heart. But in those years he taught us, and all of those around us, the incredible value of every human life and the miracle of God's energy within each human cell. The privilege of working with our little boy, who worked so hard to do each exercise, is something I cannot express. We have offered this program to other families in Venezuela as the Programa Leopoldo, and we are happy to recommend our American instructor to all those interested. In 1981, the Socialist Party of Venezuela introduced a proposal to legalize abortion, particularly for children like that. The Venezuelan bishops managed to defeat this first attempt, but International Planned Parenthood and their agents and feminists returned to the attack, arguing that 10,000 women died of botched abortions each year. They invented statistics that 400,000 abortions were done each year in our country of only 20 million. In spite of having a house full of young children, I was spurred to action and was able to use the real statistics of the ministry to totally disprove their figures. Leopoldo and the good he was doing to my other children was my shield against those arguing for abortion for subnormal children. Mother Teresa of Calcutta called him the professor of love. The atmosphere of laissez-faire, which my husband and I found around us, was very frightening, and we felt we must get together a group to fight this obvious threat to Christian morality. Allergies. And attack to this threat to Christian morality. And this attack on the poor and those with disabilities. We founded, therefore, the Venezuelan Pro-Life Association Provive. That was 1981. Seeing the attitude of the leadership of the country, we decided that the situation was so critical that our association should be non-religious. The political, intellectual, and cultural tendency was to isolate church teaching as a religious choice, and we needed to coalesce the large majority in favor of the right to life. For this same reason, and in view of the tremendous acceptance even among Catholics of the contraceptive pill, we reluctantly limited our efforts to fighting abortion without openly attacking contraception. This was very difficult for me to do, as I am convinced that the contraceptive mentality is what has led the world to the abortion mentality. But this was tactical and strategic thinking. Our first activities in Pro Vive started was to invite prominent scientists to Venezuela, rather as you are doing with your Mystery of Life. The first scientist we invited was the Frenchman Jérôme Lejeune, the father of genetics. His discovery in the 1950s of trisomy 21, the genetic origin of Down syndrome, made him a good candidate for a Nobel Prize, but his pro-life convictions were an impediment for this honor. After Lejeune's brilliant visit, where he spoke to doctors, academics, bishops, and the general public, and how he showed the humanity of the unborn, we invited the famous Dr. Bernard Nathanson, the promoter of abortion in the United States, who changed his mind when he became a pioneer in the new science of fetology at one of the great hospitals in New York. Dr. Nathanson, who never got over having been responsible for so many abortions, and eventually became Catholic, was an extraordinary speaker about the evils of killing preborn children. After that, we invited Professor Viktor Frankl, the Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist, whose book, Man's Search for Meaning, is one of the world's 10 most read and most translated books. The remarkable approach of this wonderful Jew, who served 7 years in Hitler's concentration camps, gave Pro Vive full credentials as a serious scientific center. We then set up centers for women and their children in the poor parts of Caracas, where we were able to see at first hand what was going on in our population. At the same time, I, whose first activity before marriage had been as a reporter, was able to gain entry as a columnist at the newspaper of greatest circulation in the country, a tabloid called Últimas Noticias, latest news. Even though the owner of this paper was a convinced population controller, he and the director found our approach scientific and argued with facts and statistics interesting. My articles were short, clear, and often anti-American. The USAID was pushing population control in all the continent, and my articles indicated the mechanisms of the corruption going on between the pharmaceutical companies, the eugenics movement, and government officials, which was orchestrated by Planned Parenthood and huge foundations in the United States. The knowledge and contacts that we were able to accumulate over the years, together with the fact that my family are in Europe, the USA, and Latin America, combined to create a demand for international action. The first international activities were international congresses for the family, starting in 1985. In almost every country, people were clamoring for information and for experts in order to fight the trends and policies endangering the family and the right to life. For 10 years, one of my big activities consisted of organizing high-level congresses for 2,000 or 3,000 people in the capitals of Europe. This activity has now been taken over by a wonderful group called World Congress of Families, presided by Dr. Alan Carlson of the Howard Center, which is blossoming into a huge worldwide network of pro-family forces. The Pontifical Council for the Family, under its great president, Cardinal Lopez Trujillo, invited my husband and me to become members, and for 20 years we have been privileged to help in the huge work of that important entity. In 1990, I was asked to be part of the Holy See delegation to the UN by now Cardinal Renato Martino. This work for 5 years took me frequently to the General Assembly in New York and to meetings such as the Rio Earth Summit, the Cairo and Beijing conferences. There I was able to see the anti-life and anti-family workings of this dangerous international body, and how small countries are forced to agree to policies with which they do not agree. As our work advanced, it became obvious that the main vector of the contraceptive and abortion mentality was, and is, the so-called sex education of Planned Parenthood. This disgusting, immoral, and invasive matter, designed and promoted by International Planned Parenthood in cooperation with the pharmaceutical industry, who make immense fortunes selling contraceptives and antibiotics for the sexually transmitted diseases spread by the promiscuity which they teach, has been around for some time and is the greatest crime of all. Sex education, as they sell it, corrupts and destroys the innocence and virtue of children and young people, and it is arguably worse than killing them. One professor we invited to Venezuela and to international congresses was a surprising choice, an American, Jewish, Freudian psychiatrist from California. His name, Melvin Anchel. This man dedicated his life to writing and lecturing about the psychological and psychiatric harm done to children by explicit sex education. His arguments gave increased impetus to our work against this horror. When in 1984 the Venezuelan government voted to make sex education compulsory, 9 years of school, my husband agreed that I must turn my energies to developing an alternative which would make the genital-based, obscene, and liberating variety of sex education obsolete. Of course, I had no idea how long it would really take, how much it would cost, or how complicated it would be. But the Lord certainly inspired me with a tremendous conviction that it was needed, and I never had a doubt about it. It was to be a series of 12 texts, starting age 6 all the way through school to age 18, for use in schools, grades 1 to 12, demonstrating in an attractive and convincing way the universal virtues and values, and how to live them at each age level. Learning virtues and applying them to friendship, decision-making, romance, and the choice of a spouse for life would help children to be happy and to avoid the promiscuity promoted in sex education, television, and advertising. With Our Lady's guidance, many rather miraculous coincidences and opportunities, this series grew to fruition and is now circulating in 14 countries of Latin America. An adaptation for Africa was developed by the African Federation for Family Action and is now in the printing process. The Brazilian Episcopal Conference has adopted and translated it for Brazil, and it will be going into the schools in March in Brazil. An English version is published and distributed by Grace Wing in the UK, England and Wales. The education authorities of Panama and Chile have approved it also. This curriculum can assist schools or after-school groups to convey those values which have also been defined by such great development experts as Nobel Prize winner Gary Becker and Bernardo Klicksberg of the World Bank as being essential to social harmony and development. The format of this program, called Alive to the World, or Learning to Cherish is its other name, is a continuous novel about a group of children as they grow up. It's a 12-year program of 1 hour per week through the whole school year. The characters in this story live lives like any other at school and play, at home and in the community. They have the universal aspirations to belong, to have friends, to succeed, and to have a sense of significance. Sports are an important element in this evolving story, as are friendship and family life in its diverse aspects. Through the story, the students can see and understand many ways of dealing with everyday situations and relationships, and where the logic of integrity, loyalty, truthfulness, justice, perseverance, and solidarity becomes evident. They learn through the story that each person is different, and to appreciate the huge diversity of talent that exists, as well as to see that everyone has weaknesses to be worked on and to be understood. These texts are not religious, but anthropologically based, which makes them acceptable in today's school systems. Catholic schools are finding that they create a base of structured reasoning and an understanding of commitment upon which religious education can more readily take root. The program includes teachers' manuals for each level, which provide ways to enhance the effect of the story with activities and discussion. Teacher training courses of various academic levels provide teachers with what seems to be a way to achieve better harmony and better results in the classroom, as the different stages of child development applied to character education are explained in a way which is directly relevant to the classroom. Teachers are enjoying a new way of seeing the teenage years as a time for mental and psychological integration, as we help them to understand the latest neurological discoveries about this interesting age. Our teacher training courses will soon be online, we hope, finances permitting. It is my conviction that the most important work that I have done is to provide for school children an easy and amusing way to understand the virtues which in their inner hearts they long to live. Courage, patience, generosity, loyalty, understanding, justice, perseverance, solidarity, and true friendship. Children love these books and find themselves in them. Teachers find that the classroom becomes much more manageable and the children more interested in being responsible people. The award so generally apportioned to me and my work will be applied to making this Alive to the World, this Learning to Cherish, available for schools which cannot afford to buy the books. We know the books with proper care last for many successive years. Therefore, with an investment of only $600, we can supply an entire classroom for several years. The occasion of this award has been a moment to think back on all the blessings the Lord has given me, the privilege of defending his most defenseless children, and then, perhaps more importantly, to work to protect their innocence and to form them in the virtues that are needed in order for them to form happy, solid families. I'm extremely grateful for the generosity and the hospitality shown to me and through me to all those who have worked with me for these 30 years. One representative is with me, which is Cousteau, but there are many others. I thank the Lord for his bounty, the love which he has inspired in all of you, and I thank all of you for being here with me today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.